Okay, now that the high expectations have been set, let's see how we do. So, to begin expectations, I won't have any slides, so I'm going to capitalize and use the map that the Honourable Minister shared. Hopefully, within the few minutes I'll spend up here, you'll have an insight into what we're thinking about, what I'm thinking about. The company I represent, ExxonMobil, it's a small Texas oil and gas company, and with a lot of capabilities in some of the key dimensions in the energy industry and a very long history of doing that. So I'll share some of those elements that are important for Cyprus. So the topic today is an update on the energy landscape. What I'd tell you is that the energy landscape is continuously evolving. I've worked for 30 years in ExxonMobil and the upstream business and all aspects of it all around the world, and it's continually evolving. And so it's incredibly important to understand the situation and then look at the options and create those options for the future. And they're driven by technology and partnership. And so we'll talk about the impacts of that. We'll touch on 3 areas today. The first will be global energy transition. It's a very hot topic. It's been the narrative for the last 5 years or so. In the last couple of years, energy security has shared that space, and there's incredible interplay between those two. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The second topic is solving the world's energy solutions is not done at a global scale, it's done at a regional and country scale. So we'll move in a level and we'll look at the Eastern Mediterranean and what the situation is there today. We had a great introduction this morning on the geopolitics. This is not the only place in the world that we work with geopolitical complexity. It's more common than not to have those additional complexities. The economic situation, we touched on that. We had a great conversation. And then the sort of financial and foreign direct investment situation. I'll spend most of my time as a geologist talking a little bit about the investment space, the technical aspects of what we're talking about doing in the region. And that's really along the topic of implementing that natural gas solution and how we can use that as a stepping stone to decarbonize the energy sector there. And there's a lot of very important steps we need to be thinking about. Third and final thing I'm going to talk about, which is I'm going to keep my favorite subject to the end, which is exploration in Cyprus. And then we'll dig into a little bit of the geology. And this is not to educate this group on geoscience or the technical aspects, but when your kids are talking to you, asking about career options, you can say, I heard a geologist speak, and that's a really good career path. So there's one pitch. So let's start with one of the biggest, most important topics, global energy transition. And this is one of the upstream oil and gas business has been around for a long time. It's a key part of the energy system today. That position was developed over decades, and a lot of technology has been developed. We will evolve. It will just take some time to evolve. And every aspect of our lives is touched by oil and gas today. Food we eat is based on fertilized agri-processes. Primary feedstock for that is natural gas. So natural gas, power gen sector, key, many aspects. And that's why it's such an important transition fuel. Upstream portfolios, a company like mine, I am charged to manage the portfolio, and it's not one of just replacing oil and gas. We're in an extractive industry, so it's very important to replace, but also look to the future. What does society need, and how do we deliver on our key challenge, which is directed by the customer and society. So it's, first of all, reliable energy. It has to be affordable, and it has to be clean. And you'll see as the energy system evolves, originally from biomass to coal, today we use largely oil and gas as a majority share. That will evolve, it just takes time. The one lesson from the past, though, when you dig into that transition is we don't drop these primary sources of primarily biomass to coal to oil and gas. We build one upon the other. So today, when you look at the globe, 8 billion people, there's many people using biomass. There's many countries and economies using coal increasingly in the last couple of years. And then obviously oil and gas. And we tailor those technological solutions. So that presents this dual challenge today of decarbonization. That's mainly technology driven. We're making very good progress in that space. There's a lot to do. No one company, even a big company like ExxonMobil, we can't do that ourselves. It's a partnership across companies and in very close partnership with government. So European Union's made a lot of progress in the last 10 years. Been working this for a long time. A lot of renewable projects. There's great development and capacity growth in that space. You're going to see the United States, if you've heard of the Inflation Reduction Act, that's supercharging transition pace in the US. And just to give you an example of the magnitude of projects, we're the part of a consortium of companies. We're the lead company in the Houston Hub project. That's a $100 billion project. And just for scale, we deploy tens of billions of dollars per year globally in ExxonMobil. So it's a very large capital investment. And that's going to generate hydrogen. So we'll take a final investment decision, the largest hydrogen plant in the world next year, beyond production in 2027. We'll refire all of our petrochemical footprints. This is refining and petrochemicals in the Gulf Coast with hydrogen instead of methane. And then we'll put the CO2 in the ground. So that's called a pre-combustion decarbonization path. And it's one that we can do with technologies that exist today, and we can do it at massive scale. And the reason to move fast on that, and we've worked very closely with the US government on the Inflation Reduction Act to enable that level of investment and pace. And so that's a place we can leverage around the world from a technology standpoint. And that's, in that case, using methane to generate hydrogen to store the CO2, and then for heat generative processes in a lot of difficult to decarbonize sectors using hydrogen at scale. And that's the path that we'll use to build a hydrogen economy, and also things like ammonia. And so it takes time, but those investments are going into play in a big scale. And there's also large investments in Europe. So that's a little bit on the energy transition at a global scale. Talking about what we know, global population today is about 8 billion people. By 2050, it'll be about 9 billion. By 2100, 10 billion. So population's rising. GDP growth is driving overall energy demand growth. And we have high confidence on that. And if you look at all the UN or IEA or EIA data, it sort of supports that. The question and the big uncertainty is the energy mix that makes up that globally growing energy need, and the contribution of oil and gas. And there's many scenarios out there, from IEA net zero, which is a very rapid transition, to slower transitions. Today, the world economy is speeding up again. We're back up to 102 million barrels a day of oil and gas, oil use on the liquid side. So, you know, the world needs oil and gas, but we also need to change the way that's developed, much lower emissions, much more efficient, and we also need to integrate it with renewable projects and decarbonization options. Moving a little bit to the regional energy solution, and that's really a story of natural gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. So the geology here is super interesting. I visited Cyprus when I was at university in Edinburgh 35 years ago. It's some of the best rocks in the world, just so as you know. And today we're back in Cyprus with ExxonMobil, and we're looking offshore in the subsurface. And you saw the map on the wall earlier. Just looking at those pink areas, which represent the discovered oil and gas fields, you can see just by the amount of pink, Egypt is the largest and most diverse and longest oil and gas industry in the region. Israel, very, very significant with Leviathan and Tamar. That's getting developed. And the pink dots in Cyprus were smaller. They're smaller resources, but they're still extremely important. And what our challenge is, in partnership with government, is to get those resources developed. And I'll just shed some light on what it takes to do that. So we have to, first of all, understand the subsurface. So that means imaging these resources, assessing them, looking at development plans. You saw that big infrastructure footprint that's already in Egypt. It's about how do we build and design and implement that infrastructure in Cyprus to get the gas developed. And there's many technical ways to do that, floating LNG, onshore LNG. And the first step is to really understand the subsurface. So people say, well, oh, ExxonMobil, they're investing in Cyprus. And, there's all sorts of news articles on that. That was news in 2017. So if I move you through just our presence in Cyprus and what our objectives are, in 2017, we took our first position in the upstream, and we started to collect data to understand the subsurface. That was the basis for one of those discoveries, Glaucus, on one of our blocks. And then subsequent to that, we started to learn about the geology, and we've moved very, very quickly in the last 2 years. So the map did not show our position in Egypt, which is even larger, just directly to the south of Block 5. And we also have a very large position in Greece. So from a ExxonMobil upstream standpoint, our position in the Eastern Mediterranean is very, very significant now. It's all operated blocks, and we're at what I'd describe as an early stage in our exploration journey. And if I move now to my third and final topic, it's really about exploration in Cyprus. And so just to give this group a little flavor of what it takes to explore for oil and gas, the first thing we need to do is understand the geology. And it's technically very challenging. It's like if you think the Hubble Space Telescope, that's the type of technological complexity it takes to see into the subsurface below deep water. And it's even more difficult in the Eastern Mediterranean because of salt. It makes it very difficult to image. So we use very sophisticated seismic technology. And those very sophisticated boats with the latest cutting-edge technology were out offshore Cyprus last year acquiring data. The boat went to Greece after that, just finished acquiring data, and the boat will be back in Cyprus before the end of the year acquiring data there. So we're in that data acquisition phase, and the evolution in technology in that, if you think about even MRI imaging, if you go to the hospital today, you go into a little tube, you come out, and the doctor's got a beautiful picture, and hopefully they can find what's wrong with you. That's what we're effectively doing right now. We're imaging below the subsurface. The next step that we'll go to is to map that. And that data is just coming in now. So over the next year or so, we'll have a lot of geoscientists and geophysicists looking at that. And then in the 25 timeframe, we'll be planning to drill wells. And that's when we really go out and test the hydrocarbon system, hopefully make a lot more discoveries. And for ExxonMobil, if you look at Leviathan and Tamar on the Israeli side, that's about 30 to 35 TCF of gas. It's a very big accumulation. Zohr, 30, 35 TCF as well. And then the area to the west of West Nile Delta and then north into Block 5, we hope and aspire to discover similar volumes there. But importantly, we won't know until we get a look at that seismic image next year. And then we plan to drill our wells in 2025. And that's us moving at sort of industry-leading pace for such complex geology. And then subsequent to that, then we make decisions on infrastructure build-out. And oftentimes people will say, I meet a lot of oil ministers around the world, and they say, just go do what you're doing in Guyana. For us, that's a place where the fastest growing economy in the world, all driven by oil and gas development. They'll be doing 1 million barrels a day by 2027. So once we get the geology figured out, we have the capability at Exxon to move very fast at very large scale. And it's taking that technical aspect back to economic growth. If you look at the economic growth in Qatar today, in Guyana, that's the pace of those world-leading economic growth is driven by that oil and gas development. And if we have success in the geology here, it underpins not growth to take over the majority of the economy. We absolutely want a diverse economy, but having an energy sector that's more than 1.9%, it can underpin all of those other, local electricity supply. We have almost 100% fuel oil use today. It's very carbon intensive. If we immediately switch that to combined cycle natural gas, it gives a 60% emissions reduction overnight. The US achieved a 15% emissions reduction just by a shift from coal to natural gas. We have all the technology to do that. It's very complementary to renewables capacity build out because it gives a stable base load for the grid, and then you build towards a smart grid where you can very efficiently utilize intermittent solar and wind generation as well. So it's not the oil and gas industry versus renewable. These projects going forward will be working hand in hand, and there'll be carbon sequestration and storage dimensions using green electrons, and then using technologies such as LNG. And it's that regional solution. First steps to understand the resource in Cyprus. We're working that full speed, and also in Greece, also in Egypt to the south. Once we know what that resource looks like, it enables us to have informed development decisions with governments, and work together for a regional solution. And that can then transform economies once we get that moving. So I'll stop there. We have big plans. We have a big footprint. We're absolutely invested in Cyprus. It's a cornerstone, and it was the initial country we invested in. And subsequently, we grew in Egypt and Greece. Now we have a very large position. It's important for my company, and our partnerships with government are extremely important. That's what enables us to move fast, stay aligned, and deliver, economic growth and prosperity, which is what our company's mission is. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to, as part of our discussion, answer any questions you might be interested in.